Let's start. First of all, I'm Tom Zinnen. I work here at the Biotechnology Center. I won't do the formal thing, but this is Wednesday night at the lab. We do this every Wednesday night 50 times a year. I work for UW Extension Cooperative Extension and for UW-Madison, the Biotech Center here. And then this is Gerry Campbell. Gerry, where are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in Ohio.
Yeah, where in Ohio?
London, Ohio.
London, oh good. And where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school at Madison South High School.
And where'd you
near
go?
London, Ohio.
Where'd you go to undergrad?
I went to The Ohio State University.
That's called a definite article. What did you study?
I studied soil science.
Nice. And where'd you go for your master's and PhD?
New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, New Mexico.
And for your PhD?
Michigan State University in East Lansing, Michigan.
That is the East Lansing. And then where did you go?
The University of Wisconsin at Madison.
All right. And you're a professor emeritus in the Department of Ag and
Applied Economics.
Economics. You served as vice chancellor of UW Extension?
I did.
And you get to go first. Usually I introduce a second speaker, but that was me. So I'll do me real quick. That way you don't have to listen to it. I'm Tom Zinnen. I was born in Dixon, Illinois. Went to Dixon High School. Went to UW Platteville undergraduate. Studied biology, which is, of course, the study of bile. Went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which is also a public land grant research university, to get my master's in plant pathology. Came up here in January of 1982. It was 25 degrees below zero. To get my PhD in plant pathology, working on plant viruses. Then I had postdoc for a couple of years at agrogenetics on the east side of town. I spent 6 years at Northern Illinois University, and then I came here on January 3rd. It was a Monday of 1991 to take the position that I currently have. So this is why I usually say, please join me in welcoming Gerry Campbell to Wednesday night at the lab.
Thank you, sir. I feel compelled to explain the Ohio State University. Some of you know. In Ohio, there are two major state universities, at least there were when I was growing up there. One called Ohio U at Athens. And I'm not sure when the became part of the name of the Ohio State University, but if you went to school there, you learned to say that, and I often remember, especially when Tom baits me with that. It was 40 miles from my house, and when I went there in a world where if you were going to school, to college, after high school, the odds were you were going to the Ohio State University. I think I had one high school classmate that went to maybe Ohio Wesleyan, maybe one that went to Miami of Ohio. But I look around these days and I see friends who are taking their grandchildren now on these grand tours of all these colleges and universities, and I don't understand that world, because it certainly wasn't the world I was in.
We have cars now, Gerry.
I know, that's true. So I came here in 1973 in early spring, not quite early enough because I got snowed on about 15 inches. It was sometime in March, February, along in there. Tom only didn't tell me one thing, and that is, how do I move to the next slide? Just hit the button, hit the big button, or too many buttons up here.
This is the cuneiform here?
Yes, I see. I got you. Okay. Let me just say a few other things. I am an emeritus professor. That means retired, but I get a little bit of parking spaces sometimes, and I can use the library, and I have access to some other things that are nice to have. But I don't do this kind of talking much anymore. I did it for better than 30 years as an extension specialist in agricultural and applied economics, mainly in the area of marketing agricultural products, especially grain. Later in my career, I did a lot of work in community economic development and leadership development, and was very much involved with another name of a part of the extension program that will show up here later, called the Leadership Wisconsin, then now called the that's terrible. Like I said, I'm retired. And it now called Leadership Wisconsin, and I'll make a few comments about that. I want to tell you that I am secretary, typist, and so forth, and if something looks bad in this presentation from the screen point of view, it's only because Tom didn't quite get it edited for me, because I showed up with it about 5 o'clock. So we want to do some history in here, and I want to say this first statement about the fact that we were created in politics is a thing I want to remind us all of, because I believe in the United States we have basically talked ourselves out of the fact that this is a democracy, and that only way a democracy works if we are involved in politics. And so we avoid it, and sometimes we point fingers at the democracy, and I claim it's pointing 4 back at you or 3 back at you when you're pointing at something like that. We need to be involved, and we need to realize we are involved. As a faculty member here at UW, it was very, very easy to ignore what happened on the other end of State Street until something big happened on the other end of State Street. And so that's a big topic, but I want to mention it because it's relevant to some things I'll say later. We know these dates, I think many of us. State territorial legislature, that works both ways, woo. 1848, the Wisconsin governor, Nelson Dewey, approved the UW. I put the Alumni Association formed here in 1861. There's a very long list of this online if you want more of these dates. But the Alumni Association clearly has always been one of the outreach dimensions of the university, especially when it comes to not only using their what they learned here, but letting other people know what it was like to go here. In 1866, the legislature designated the then University of Wisconsin as the land-grant institution. There was a lot of pushing and shoving about whether or not we would be designated, this campus would be designated the land-grant institution. River Falls wanted it to be the land-grant institution. Ripon College wanted to be the land-grant institution. And in fact, if you look at the very last part of that statement up there, we basically had to reorganize to create a Department of Agriculture to be eligible. But the powers that be politically got us that designation, and we got a sizable amount of land out of that and sold it very quickly. Sorry, I see Tom pointing, and I thought he was pointing at me. The legislature established letters and science, mechanics and engineering, and agriculture and law all in the same year, 1899. I put Babcock's invention in here because clearly before the formality of extension existed, Babcock's invention was so popular that he was doing lots of things to get out and about and tell people about it. There's some evidence that this became not a really popular thing for him to do after a while because it was literally a worldwide invention. I also mentioned that Burge was the first dean of letters and science. Henry, William Arnon Henry, was the first dean of the College of Agriculture. And I argue, as Tom does, that if you really look hard, University Extension is originally, in fact, if you look, it's Thomas Chamberlain got Extension going. 1894, one of the things that we all learn if we know much about this was the statement that was made as part of the follow-up to the Ely trial over whether or not Professor Ely was teaching socialism. Whatever may be the limitations which trammel inquiry elsewhere, we believe that the great state University of Wisconsin shall ever encourage the continual and fearless sifting and winnowing by which alone the truth may be found. That statement is deeply connected with the Wisconsin idea and the outreach dimension of this university. When I worked in cooperative extension, it became very clear to me that the people that needed the protection of the Wisconsin statement on academic freedom most worked in the counties. And they worked in the counties because they were exposed most directly to local politics and local government and local folks. And it was a tough job. A lot of us on this campus were sort of hidden inside the big institution. The summer session was established in 1899. That clearly is an outreach dimension of the university. It was something that was going on. I've read quite a bit lately about John Bascom, and I'll mention why I read that recently. Bascom was a predecessor of Van Hise. Bascom was among the folks who, at his period in time, was a part of, among other things, the social gospel movement. He was a certified practicing preacher. He was very driven by his notion that a university should do things that made life better as a part of the things that you were supposed to do. The social gospel movement believed that you should do everything you could to create as much of heaven here on earth as you could otherwise. He was also, like many presidents of universities at the time, he taught the moral philosophy course. That was part of his job. And those kinds of dimensions are part of the history of higher education, connected to the church in many institutions. Certainly most of the big institutions that we know these days, the Harvards, the Yales, Princeton, a variety of others, were all connected. University of Chicago connected with churches in some way, shape, or form, and ideas about how education related to a better life. Here's a picture of Van Hise. He came as a geologist. We heard a talk in this room a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago, or at least in another course, where a person we know who was doing the speaking, who is a geologist, mentioned every one of these early presidents of the university who were geologists. I have to admit that one of the things that I thought about with Van Hise lately is that up in Reedsburg, I think it's in Reedsburg, it's up in that direction, there's a Van Hise rock. Some of you have seen it. Do you remember where it is?
Rock Springs.
Rock Springs. And I believe I heard this year that Rock Springs was virtually underwater. And I said to myself, I wonder if the Van Hise rock has moved off of its perch and its plate. The idea was that that particular kind of rock was similar to rock in New York and other parts of the East, which are all part of the same geological formation. This is my typing that cut this off, but Charles Van Hise is associated at the university with the development of the Wisconsin idea. Now, the Wisconsin idea is the name of a book written by a man named Charles McCarthy, who was outside the university but dyed-in-the-wool university person who helped create and helped write a book, or wrote a book about the Wisconsin idea. But beyond the university, it was very much about progressive politics, and it was about trying to make improvements. This was a time in history when we had gone through a development of huge aggregations of capital in the hands of very few people, Standard Oil, some of the big railroads, and a variety of others. And there was a real pushback during this late 1800s, early 1900s, to try to control the extent to which money was controlling our society, and a lot of worry about whether or not we were going to lose our democracy. The statement is pretty famous by now. I shall never be content until the beneficent influence of the university reaches every family in the state. The UW now defines the idea as proclaiming that the boundaries of the university are the boundaries of the state and beyond, that the UW's purpose is to share knowledge and discoveries with people around the world. That was the statement that the UW used a few years ago, 2011, I believe, when they celebrated the year of the Wisconsin idea. Now, the Wisconsin idea is one of those ideas that has been so potentially useful and so attractive to people that many people have put the word Wisconsin idea either in front of or behind a large number of different kinds of things. Let's see. Let me see where I am here. We did this. Okay. Our friend Gwen Drury, who has spoken in this room several times about the Wisconsin idea in a class which I'll mention later, looks very carefully at the entire historic context and argues that what the Wisconsin idea really was, the idea that was truly a Wisconsin idea, not just the idea of connecting public university to the people who supported it, was a distinctive approach developed in Wisconsin to use knowledge and resources of all kinds to keep the governance and the economy in the hands of the greatest number of people and not just the small number who could corner a market. The Wisconsin idea was developed at a time when, as I said before, there was a question about the future of democracy. The early practitioners on this campus and the people beyond the campus and the progressive movement were about trying to address the disparity of income and control that was afoot at that particular time. This is Ag Hall. We're going to shift. Cooperative Extension is in our purview tonight. And basically, agriculture on this campus became a department at the time, or became an office at the time that the land grant status was created. But it was also part of what was going on the campus very early on. In the 1870s, the university used $40,000 donated by Dane County to purchase a farm west of the campus and establish a Department of Agriculture. When I was looking at this history, one of the things that was very interesting to me was at this point in history, the regents had a farm committee, 3 people, all of whom had extensive experience in agriculture. Why did the university want a farm in the 1870s? It was not as an experimental farm. It supplied milk, it supplied wood. Wood was cut on the farm for the boilers and so forth on campus, and it sold things that were raised on the farm. Some of the early Board of Regents' concerns over creating an experimental farm, and ultimately the experiment station, was that they were going to lose access to the income from that farm, which went into university accounts. So Henry was hired. He had spent some time at Cornell. Henry was a very interesting man. My friend Aisha Summersand, who's now deceased, was Dean of Cooperative Extension for several years. Aisha would have called William Henry a man with extension bones. He liked very much being out among people. And the agriculture department was so small at the time he was hired, there really wasn't as many things to do in his office or in the work in his office and around the university farm, and he spent lots and lots of time out among farmers and had a very good rapport with them. State legislature established Ag Experiment Station in 1883, and much to the concern of some people on campus, including Henry, the early aspects that some people argue are the precursors to a formal extension program was the Farm and Industry Short Course. It was tried because the regents made them try it. And it was useful. People came. They were happy with what happened. Then the Farmers' Institutes began to happen around the state. And that was, again, taking these ideas to farmers, and they were increasingly pushed to make them very practical ideas. They would also include with them the farmers that seemed to be the most progressive and farmers as teachers. Extension really emerged here in the College of Agriculture, then the Department of Agriculture, from the work of the experiment station. That was what was needed. We needed new research and new ideas. Here's E.L. Luther, a representative of the college in Oneida County. And Luther was one of the first two agents that were sent out by Dean Russell to basically be the college's agents in the field. Russell believed they should be considered part of the faculty. But he also acknowledged that if they were called professor, that might not sit very well with a lot of the people around them. I used to go to an extension, general extension program in Rhinelander, where this picture is taken in front of the Oneida County Courthouse. Anybody from Oneida County or know of the Oneida County Courthouse? It's a beautiful building. I walked down there one day at lunchtime when I was in Rhinelander for the School of the Arts, and I was really shocked. There's now a plaque there that describes the fact that Oneida County had the first rural zoning program in the state of Wisconsin. I was surprised because zoning in my life in this state has been pretty controversial, and it's had to do with, controlling who can build what where. The zoning program that they developed was driven by the fact that the people in the county had figured out that if they let people build willy-nilly in Oneida County, it was going to cost a lot more money to serve them from the governmental point of view. And they were really encouraging people living in villages and so forth and so on. So it was quite surprising to me. Now, this is the real illustration of my very limited capacity with a computer and a graphics program. These are all symbols that are there in the Apple world that I live in, and I'll try to explain what's going on in this here. The cooperative extension model is absolutely unique in the world. The cooperative extension model, the work of cooperative extension in nearly every other country that has agricultural or rural extension is done by state government, meaning in Australia it would be the provinces or the territories. It comes out of state labs and state research labs. It does not connect directly to a university. Here, the model that was developed was a model which connects the U.S. Department of Agriculture with the land-grant university. I couldn't help but stick that megaphone in there when I saw that today, and I thought the brain was a good thing to put in there because, that's what we say it happens in this town. Graduates, and each one of these, down to the county level, involves money. Every one of those groups provide part of the funding for this. Mostly, in my day, you went to the courthouse to find the local extension office. And one of the things that, as I worked in the chancellor's office in UW Extension, when Pat Boyle was here, Pat Boyle and many of his colleagues over the years were very proud of the fact that UW Extension offices in counties are not mandates. There's a state law that permits the county to have a UW Extension office and describes the kinds of things that office should do. Those have been changed over the years and expanded over the years. But the county extension office is a decision made by the county board in a county. And so these partners are all working collaboratively on a program. And I will say that they are working collaboratively in the most general sense of this. Because like institutional partners in any sort of an arrangement, there's lots of pushing and shoving among the partners. The people at the county would just as soon the state drop the money and go home, at least the administrative part of it. The people in the state would just as soon the federal government drop the money and go home. I couldn't find a picture to illustrate the fact that every one of these entities reports to the other entity at some point in time about what's going on. Probably the most influential thing over time has been when any one of the entity wanted to decide that they controlled what the rest of them did. Certainly there have been administrations in Washington. I really don't know what the situation is currently, but I know in the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton was very expecting that these county extension offices would be able to carry that message down the line. Once in a lecture I was giving up in Northwest Wisconsin when there were changes being made in federal farm programs, I was told at lunchtime by a farmer, actually he just walked up to me and said, "You work for Richard Nixon." And I just sort of fell back. We were doing education about futures markets, and the government was at that time trying to add a dimension of futures trading into risk prevention strategies for farmers. But I never thought explaining how that was supposed to work made me an employee of Richard Nixon. But I was an extension specialist, so I suppose in some way I was. The counties have always been, the counties have different levels of capacity to support an extension program, and they have different levels of interest in the kind of extension program they support. And so that relationship is one that continually has to be worked through if it's really going to be collaborative. Several years ago, there was sort of a general agreement put together that 40% of the cost of a county office would be paid for by the county, and 60% of the costs of the extension program that came from extension would be paid by extension. That was in force at that point. We'll get a comment later, perhaps by the current dean from Cooperative Extension who's here tonight. In any case, those relationships have been what all collaborative relationships are. They take a lot of work. And I think one of the things that's most true about the historic realization of the connection in the Wisconsin idea beyond the campus is that it's harder work than what happens on the campus. Now, people would say I'm dead wrong about that, but I'll say it because it does involve the fact that everything you could assume as a professor about what might happen if you're going to teach a class this next semester, somebody will will provide a way for you in a classroom, somebody will get the heat turned on, et cetera, and if you're lucky, that classroom will be in your building. When you do outreach extension work, you have to leave the campus to a certain extent. And today, of course, we're looking at technology to change some of that. How is this money divided? This came from a national group, and it shows you that there's a lot of range in terms of state funding, federal funding, and county funding, and grants and revenue and so forth. The one thing that is important in the context of the university, the history of cooperative extension, which has now been changing for several years, the history of cooperative extension was a history in which when people participated in extension programs, they did not have to pay a fee for the knowledge and for the resource that was presenting that program. They might have to pay a fee for lunch because that was not something that was provided by cooperative extension, but by and large the personnel and the materials and so forth were paid for. That particular dimension was very different than in quote unquote general extension. In general extension, continuing professional education, those kinds of things, those programs were fee-based. And that basically always created a wedge between those two parts of the university, who taught for free, quote unquote. Of course, it wasn't free, it was provided by somebody through the mechanism, and those who had to rouse up students for money. The federal oversight group, I think now, although I would note that all is provisional in this world, is still the Cooperative State Research Education and something. Carl, I don't know what CREES stands for anymore. Education, Extension, and Research. So this is the USDA arm of this. Cooperative extension really came to an existence in 1914. We had extension in agriculture before then. with the Smith-Lever Act, which helps fund the federal side. This is the picture, one of the pictures that appears on the UW website. The earliest parts of extension in this state and in other states were very much targeted at agriculture, farming, homemakers later, but today it's much broader than that, because rural Wisconsin is much broader than that and always has been. Several years ago, there was a report on the share of income earned by agriculture by county across the state, probably one of the ag census years. And as I remember it at that time, there were only 7 counties in the state who had more than 1/3 of the total income that came into that county from agriculture. Some people wonder about that, but if you start looking, Dane County is one of the largest agriculture counties in the country still. But right in the middle of it, practically, is this big city, state capital, all kinds of business and industry. So the share of income in Dane County from agriculture will turn out to be a pretty small number. In some other counties, it will be certainly a much bigger number. Gerry Apps is the person who wrote this book about UW Cooperative Extension. And many of you know Gerry. Gerry's written many books about extension, and he's a real expert. And I'm told that he has a new book out that's about his life as a professor. He was a professor in continuing education that is about much of that role. He's written many times about his life in other history books related to the UW. In 1965, we get a big jump here. All kinds of great stuff happened by both general extension and cooperative extension. But the things that have been close to my life since I came here was 65 UW Extension was moved into a separate unit category at UW-Madison. And they were combined into one thing, which was called UW Extension, but it was still underneath the general Madison purview. But it was no longer a major part of it. Cooperative Extension was no longer under the College of Ag and Life Sciences. Certainly there were people in Ag and Life Sciences that were specialists for extension, but the county-based faculty were basically under part of this new unit. In 71, the legislature establishes the University of Wisconsin system and merged the Wisconsin and Wisconsin State Universities, and UW Extension became, this is a typo, UW Extension became, with UW Centers, became separate institutions of the UW system. That means they had a chancellor, they had, basically, they were part of the decision-making among all the rest of the institutions of the system, and that existed until not long ago. In 85, the 1980s was a very, very tumultuous year for UW Extension and UW-Madison, because for most of that decade, there were big arguments about whether things should have been left in UW-Madison, not gone to UW Extension, and basically UW-Madison brought back through an arrangement that was worked through the Board of Regents a number of faculty back to the Madison campus. 2011, UW celebrated the Year of Wisconsin Idea to highlight how the work of the university contributes to the state, nation, and the world. There's a lot of material online about that. UW Extension and UW colleges merged under one chancellor in 2005. That was said to be a money-saving activity. I don't know whether it was or not. I had high hopes for that activity because I thought that both of these partners were clearly in the same learning game. They were in the same educational game. But I would say that merger was not a very happy one. And it created lots of strain in the employees. It's also true that the UW colleges, the two-year institutions, some of them have been struggling dramatically for several years with enrollment declines. One thing I want to say, because it's relevant to what happened in terms of the proposal for reorganization, a colleague of mine once said at a National Agricultural Economics meeting, if you've seen one cooperative extension system, you've seen one cooperative extension system. And that's really a wise thing, because if you think about that collaboration I put up there, that collaboration is one that's hard to keep together, and it just works out completely, very, very differently from one institution to the other. I'll just mention this. I'll read this because you can't read it. Zinnen warned me, but I didn't follow his work. Draft in February of 2015. They say, the Center for Media and Democracy, not a part of the UW, had a headline that says Walker strikes truth and Wisconsin idea from the UW mission in the budget. This was Governor Walker's draft budget. All hell broke loose, to say the least. People who had never heard of the Wisconsin idea were upset of the Wisconsin idea was being taken out. Most people were upset the idea of public service was taken out, and the other idea that was taken out was the search for the truth was no longer going to appear in the basic document that set up the UW system. Governor Walker, basically said this was a drafting error, and it disappeared from the headlines, except that here's the language itself. It disappeared from the headlines after a few months. One of the things that happened out of that, and that's a surprise slide for me. One of the things that happened out of that, the slide will come up here in a minute. Patrick Brenzel here got mad, and what's that got to do with anything? Patrick Brenzel did something about it. One person in the university who, as he told me the first time I ever met him, answers the phones in the sociology department, went to his department chair and said, we should teach a course about the Wisconsin idea. I don't know whether he's shaking his head because, anyway. And he convinced his department chair and another professor to help put together a course on the Wisconsin idea. That course is now running for 3 years, and it holds its classes open to the public in this room on Tuesday nights at 6 o'clock each week during the fall semester. You may have some classes that are across the street in the Discovery Center. Is that true this year?
Last year.
Yeah, okay. So they're also online, so you can learn a ton. The October surprise, October 2017, UW system Ray Cross publicly proposes restructuring of the University of Wisconsin system, announced this proposal without consulting shared governance group or administrators or a whole lot of other partners that were partners with the UW. The proposal was to eliminate UW colleges and UW Extension. UW colleges campuses would become part of four-year institutions, and the divisions of UW Extension would be distributed between UW-Madison and UW system. So Save the Wisconsin idea was one more time on the block. Many people were concerned about public broadcasting. Lots of people were concerned about their local unit of the UW colleges. I was concerned about UW Cooperative Extension. And here's my ad for Patrick's class. Got out of order here. The system, this is what the latest system map looks like. You can see it online. It has linkages between the various centers and the various parts of the institution. UW Cooperative Extension is now part of UW-Madison, and Broadcasting and Media Innovations, which includes Wisconsin Public Broadcasting, is part of UW-Madison, and UW Conference Centers is part of UW-Madison. Interestingly, system administration took the division from UW Extension called Business and Entrepreneurship, and they also took Continuing Education, Outreach, and E-Learning. They took Instructional Communications, which manages the technology that supports distance learning. They took the Wisconsin Humanities Council, and the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service. I have no idea why they took those, because I don't know who's going to run them. UW Extension put this information out early on about some of the problems that could occur under this proposal. The proposal has gone forward, and I try to keep track of what's going on. I'd say that so far, the people that I know that are involved are doing their best to make this new system work. But I will just also note that when President Cross suggested that the savings from this were self-evident, what was self-evident to me was how many thousands and thousands of hours were going to go on to make this a reality. UW Extension Cooperative Extension, maybe the other divisions, I don't know, had been doing lots of strategic planning work and so forth. So why is UW Extension coming to UW-Madison? This was one of the questions, and this is the answer that was given. And I'm particularly interested in the last few lines. Integrating co-op extension with UW-Madison is also consistent with the practice in many other states, including Illinois, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I repeat, when you've seen one co-op extension, you've seen one co-op extension. And it may well be true that in those states, there's this set of systems that look kind of like what you're going to have now, but each one of them is very different. I'm a real skeptic about where those self-evident savings are going to come from. I'm not going to read this to you, but cooperative extension continues to work across the state and in collaboration with counties and in collaboration with the federal government. The major areas they work in, 4-H and youth development, has been an area of work for a long time. So has ag and natural resources. So has community natural resources economic development. So has family living. And more recently, Leadership Wisconsin, which used to be called the Wisconsin Rural Leadership Program. That lag time that you often need to remember the other name. And the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey. What's next? These are fairly big questions. I'm concerned whether anybody in government will champion the University of Wisconsin as a public good. I want somebody who will stand up and make a speech and say, it is the right thing to do to have a University of Wisconsin. That's what the people believed when they started the University of Wisconsin. They didn't expect it was going to generate tons of jobs. They didn't see it as a place where people would go to school and get a job. They saw it as something we should do. And yes, some people will be educated and will get jobs because of their education. But the public good was out there too. The general distrust of institutions, the skepticism about facts. Some of you saw on Sunday morning, if you watched CBS on Sunday morning, a story on the flat earthers. My mouth literally dropped open. I did not believe there were a whole bunch, and there are a whole bunch of serious people who believe the earth is flat, including one guy who's trying to build an airplane-like device to prove it to himself. People today often want to say, if I haven't seen it for myself, I don't believe it. That's very, very sad. It's not that we don't make mistakes occasionally, those of us who are educated about a variety of things. But in most of my life, I want somebody who knows what they're doing. I pay those people $75 an hour to come to my house and deal with certain plumbing problems, which I could have maybe done when I first left the farm. But I want somebody with some expertise. There's a changing relationship of UW system in the border regions to the university. Within the last 10 years, I would say, and maybe I don't pick that number with any precision, the border regions have moved from being a set of champions and oversight for the university, and the president of the UW system and their staff were people that helped the pieces of the university work better together and make progress. And yes, sometimes they said no. But today, this reorganization looks exactly like this was somebody from the top of some big corporation who said, you will do this. Because none of the rest of the justification seems like it makes sense given what it's said to do. I don't see how you're going to get more students out of a declining population around the state. I am nervous about UW Cooperative Extension getting lost in the UW-Madison. And that is really got to do with scale. UW Extension was in a unit where it was one of 3 or 4 groups with ready access to the leadership. Today, UW-Madison does love the fact that UW Cooperative Extension is coming there. But if you look at this place, I'm always reminded of a person from the Department of Administration I overheard once at a cocktail party saying, "Oh, the University of Wisconsin, 10,000 leaking roofs." And people go, this was the person at DOA that's got to approve budgets to fix those 10,000 leaking roofs. So what you see about the university as a big pile of money, my point would be that the UW-Madison is a very big institution. Cooperative Extension is a long history of great work, and it's a great part of the institution. But I think if you look at its budget and you look at the budget in the institution and you line units up by amount of money, it's going to be fairly low compared to some other places. So I'm wishing them luck. Tom says it's halftime. It's more than halftime because I used a lot more of my time. So, of your time.
Score?
5-2.
5-2. Remember when you used to listen to the World Series with your handheld radio? I don't know how the nuns always found those. I'd like to start with 3 words: authorization, appropriation, and aspiration. This is the first example of the phrase, the Wisconsin idea, that I've been able to find, or anybody I know has been able to find. This is in Hoard's Dairyman in 15th of July of 1898, and it says, "The Wisconsin idea in Scotland," which I was hoping would be, let's bring whiskey over here. And the Wisconsin idea actually at this time meant, this Hoard's idea, when you're going to raise cattle for dairy, don't worry how their meat characteristics are. Focus only on dairy characteristics. Don't try to have mixed breeds. So I learned a couple of things from this. One, has nothing to do with what its current idea is. And 2, it has to do with cows. Good. This is the table of contents, right next to that column. And if you can read that, it says, wow, keeping heifers thrifty, the American butter trade, Minnesota as a butter state, the Wisconsin idea in Scotland, give us your opinion, shipping cheese direct to England, how skim milk is wasted, and on and on. This is 1898, 8 years after the Babcock milk fat test. Wisconsin's pretty well established as a dairy state here. One of the things I like to say to people is always, 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 never forget. It almost all began with a cow. Remember what Walt Disney said? Walt Disney said, always remember, never forget. It all began with a mouse. And I'm paraphrasing what he is saying. The other thing is, most people, when they think cooperative extension, as Gerry pointed out, most people think agriculture extension. And I would like to invite you to expand that to family living, which is what I came out of, 4-H and youth development, and community and natural resources development and other areas that have new names now. That's a challenge for cooperative extension, and we're going to see in a little bit why that's a challenge. Gerry talked about John Bascom. This is John Bascom's son. No, that's my son. Sorry. This is Bascom's grave, along with his daughter Frances Bascom, who was a graduate here and a very famous geologist. He's buried about 2 miles west of where my mother-in-law lives. So we go say hi to John Bascom every now and then. And got another president of UW-Madison, Chadburn. They're buried very close, and they're very closely buried to Mark Hopkins. Anybody remembers higher education consists of Mark Hopkins on one end of a log and the student at the other. This is a big deal because he was here from 1874 to 1887, and at the end of his period came this big act of the federal government, which Gerry mentioned. This is the Hatch Act. This is the modern version of it, but this is the first time the federal government gave research to states gave money to states for research at universities. That is huge. Before NIH, before NSF, it's the longest running annual federal support for research at universities that I'm aware of. If there's something older, let me know. That's a big deal because what did it do for the College of Agriculture here? I don't know. The College of Agriculture didn't form until 1889. Remember, this went to the ag experiment stations. But once those merged, it was huge for the history of the agriculture extension here. Because what were we generating? Lots of research. Mission-driven research, driven by farmers and what they were interested in. You'll see another thing there called the Adams Act. That's 1906. That's an act from a representative from Wisconsin. And what that was additional money for ag experiment stations, specifically for research only and not for extension function. So 1887, 1906, and remember what Gerry mentioned about the Smith-Lever Act, when was that? 1914. And that's specifically for extension. Remember the three words I asked you to think about? Authorization, appropriations, and aspirations. This is an appropriation, an annual appropriation, and that's a huge deal because it's money. You've heard of that thing, every tub on its own bottom. That's true for Harvard, it's true for here, it's true for any enterprise at a university that I'm aware of. So next, we had Bascom. Next president was Thomas Chamberlain. He's the first guy that was a scientist. He was an extraordinary research geologist. And in 1890, he wrote this really cool essay that I had to read. Actually, I didn't have to read. It was just laying around over in the library in Russell Labs, and I read it, and it changed how I looked at things. Here's this thing called the Method of Multiple Working Hypotheses. 1890, our own president. This is the opening paragraph. And what you see there in the last four words, investigation, instruction, and citizenship, to me, are basically the three missions of a public land-grant research university: instruction, research, and outreach or public service. It goes on to point out there's two big ways of looking at investigations. One is derivative and one is original. The fact that we were shifting from a derivative university, we're going to teach about stuff that people knew before, to being investigators that are creating new knowledge is a huge function for the public university that was not always part of our DNA, nor was extension. But it's a huge advantage to the people of the state of Wisconsin now. This is one of my favorite phrases because I wrote it. You should take my courses in humility. They're great. Among the most valuable things the university researchers can share with the public are the ways we view and do science as a process of exploring the unknown and inventing the future. In other words, a little epistemology can go a long way. It's important for people to be able to think about the nature of evidence and proof and how you use science in making personal choices, in forming public policies, and in making decisions in the face of uncertainty. 1890, 2018. Gerry mentioned this. I never considered the sifting and winnowing part of the Wisconsin idea. I always considered distinct. But then I went and was a Congressional Science Fellow for a year in 2000 and 2001, and I could not say what I thought. Part of the rules are you say what your boss wants you to think. And I'm a guy from Madison, Wisconsin, working for a Republican from Texas, a Republican from Lubbock, Texas. Guns up. These are the rules. You say what your boss wants you to say, and you don't say anything else about that. So when I came back here, to me, I thought, wow, this is now not only an academic freedom, it's, in my opinion, a duty for people like me who are public scholars to speak up and speak out in your areas of expertise. So Charles Adams is a pretty big deal because he's given credit. We're not sure. This is supposedly anonymous, but this phrase is usually accredited to Charles Adams, our president. Look at the dates on that. 1894. A gift from the class of 1910. So that's when this thing was made. When was it actually bolted to the wall? 1915. How long is it from 1894 to 1915? It's a lot like 19 years. That's a generation in human time. That's how controversial this was. So as Gerry mentioned, and I will repeat, this is kind of like a stereophonic thing. We're going to look at things from two different points of view, but you're going to get it in stereo. This university and this state has been dealing with political controversies in the university for a long, long time. Doesn't make them any less painful, but we can draw on our prior experience. So now I'm going to talk about Charles Van Hise. He was born in Fulton, Wisconsin, which is a big deal to me because it's on the Yarhara River, and my son and I paddled through there last August of 2017. Look at his birth date. Anybody else in here born in 1957? I know he was born in 1857, but I was born in 1957, and it's 2018, and he died in 1918, which means he died when he was 61, which means I'm the same age that he was when he died. Oh, let X equal Y. Are you talking about this? Wow, that's pretty good. Keep in mind, this guy was president of the university for a long time through some of the best years that most people look at this. We're marking the centennial of his death next month. The two big things for me on this talk is 1905 speech and the launch of the Wisconsin Agricultural Cooperative Extension in 1912 happened on his watch. A whole lot of other great things did too, but that's what I would like you to think about. So this is the speech. This speech was kind of lost in limbo for a long time, and then David Null, who's the UW archivist, found it, and he sent a PDF of it to me about 4 years ago, and it changed my life. Well, not really, but it's really helpful to know, wow, you have an original document here. What do we call that in history? Primary documents, because what was the university saying all along? Wow, he gave this speech in 1904, and I keep saying to him, when did he give the 1904 version of this? Because we got a 1905. And if you would like to know something that's slower to change than a battleship, it's a university website. For those of you who get my weekly missive, you know my standard boilerplate at the end is UW-Madison, 5.8 million co-owners. I did not make that up. I got that from Charles Van Hise. What's his first line there? It's a great pleasure upon behalf of the university to welcome the representatives of its owners, the members of the legislature. Those are the representatives of the owners. Who are the owners? All of us. There are 5.8 million co-owners of this place. And he goes on to make some pretty interesting things. That's why I made photocopies of this speech. If you would like to read it, you can also see it online. He makes a point here that the framers of the Constitution, and this is a lowercase Constitution because it's the 1848 Wisconsin Constitution, said, whoa, we're going to have these in the same city. The university is an institution devoted to the advancement and dissemination of knowledge. He did not say truth. He said knowledge. That's an interesting word choice. The other thing I love about this document is you can see word choice. And as a former speechwriter, it's fascinating to see what happens when you give your draft of a speech to your boss and then it comes back with the words that they want. It's like, whoa, look at that. The university is an institution devoted to advancement and dissemination of knowledge. The government of the state is devoted to formulating into written law and putting into practice this knowledge, at least in 1905. He had a very broad vision of beneficence. Look at this bottom part here. Yeah, he's talking about how great it is to mine better and grow better stuff and lots of returns on the soil and minerals and stuff. And then he says, and the improvement of the social and economic conditions of the masses and the enjoyment by the people of the great intellectual and not spiritual, he changed it to moral experiences of the race. This is the liberal arts, ladies and gentlemen. And remember, the sciences and math have always been vital parts of the liberal arts. And I'm making the argument here, that's a huge part of what the extension mission, including cooperative extension mission, can and should be for the people of Wisconsin in the future. And then to me, this is the finest passage because it's a commitment, an idea, and the L at the end of idea is so vital when you see the original document. This is my ideal of a state university. If our beloved institution reaches this ideal, it will be the first perfect state university. That's aspirational. Authorizing, appropriation, aspirational. This is not bad. Well, in the interest of time, we're going to 2015. It was a very interesting year, 2015. It was right after the election of 2014. Here's this interesting news article by Matthew DeFore. The Assembly term papers offer insight into GOP lawmakers' ideas. The key one for our purposes is this, where David Murphy wrote a paper and pitched the idea, eliminate or reform the University of Wisconsin colleges and extension. And here's the thing that we have to realize. Extension is always having to regenerate itself. We're really proud of our roots, but we also have to think about what our trunk and our branches are, and that we're more than our roots. Not everybody gets that. Are we an antiquated system? We have to keep telling people we're adjusting, evolving, changing, adapting all the time. That's not what the representative saw, the assembly person. So he also says many of these functions can or be done by, quote, the Wisconsin Technical College system. I'm a big fan of vocational education. I was stationed by the ear of corn in high school. I was in FFA. However, I do not know that the Wisconsin Technical College system is positioned to be the connection to the research base of one of the finest public land-grant research universities in the country, both connecting the farmers to the research base and the research base to the farmers. And let me make that broader. The people wherever they may live and work and play with the researchers here in whatever fields they are in, and vice versa. So Wednesday, February 4th, everything good happens on a Wednesday. So about 10:30 in the morning, the Twitter feed comes across that the Wisconsin idea is going to be stricken from statute, authorizing, appropriating, aspiration. This is authorizing language. It's happening in a budget because what's the miracle of the budget in Wisconsin? It's not limited to appropriations. At the federal level, it is. Here at the state, you can throw in the budget, whatever you would like, and you can get passed. So you'll see, if you Google, like I did the other day, Scott Walker removes Wisconsin idea from UW's mission in the budget. He backtracks from striking truth and human condition. That was on February 5th. Oh, wait a minute, he backs off even on February 4th by 6 o'clock in the evening. This is what it looked like. Gerry spoke it to you. I want you to see, this is what's fun about having worked on Capitol Hill and done this, where you, this is part of what you do as a staffer, is you go through and You strike old language and you add new so that you can see what you're taking out and what you're sticking in. This tells you the mind of the folks that made the drafting error. I don't think it's a drafting error. I think it's very clear as to what they wanted to do. I think they were an error in how they released it. But you can see what they think is important and what they were willing to strike. None of this actually happened. So the authorizations changes didn't change at all. The words are still there. What happened with the appropriations, though? Oh, there's a $300 million cut proposed for the UW system, and it ended up being $250 million. Authorization, appropriation. When your appropriation gets cut, what happens to your aspirations? Well, they're still as big as there, but what can you do with them? Now, that was January, February. Now, this is March 5th, and this is Rick Essenberg, who was on the Joy Cardine show pretty regularly, 3 or 4 times a year. He's a critic of the Wisconsin ideas, labeled here. That's that same picture that you saw before. And this is some of the stuff that he said, not on the Joy Cardine show, but the link that was at the Joy Cardine show takes you to this. So these are some of the clear critiques of a person who finds the Wisconsin idea not to be distinguishing of Wisconsin, not to be clear as to what it's about, that it's ideological rather than pursuing knowledge. And he uses the word truth because what's in the authorizing mission? The word truth. And this is some more of what he has to say. And this one. So the pool of thought that he comes from is very happy to say the progressives, what they call the failed progressive experiment, and that we need to do things differently than what we did before. And that's why going back to these root documents is important to me, to be able to say, this is where some of this stuff came from, and reflects those times and those issues, and they still resonate today. The other thing that's cool is it's 2015, and you can get pushback online. So this is also from the Wisconsin Public Radio feedback, and this person gives some background on who Rick Essenberg is, or well, where he is coming from. So the university is dealing with this whole idea of how many different competing ideas are there for the Wisconsin idea, and what does it mean, and what should be the emphases be, and when you have limited amount of money, what things should get and what things should not get resources, money, time, FTEs. So at the close of 2015, there was no change in the authorizing language. There's a big change in the appropriations. It was originally $300 million, but it cut down to $250. Gerry showed you a slide projecting that it would be about $4 million cut to extension, and it ended up being slightly more than $3 million.
3.6.
3.6, thank you. And Gerry's slide showed about 80 and FTEs, and it ended up being about 80. Okay.
Less than that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. How much less?
Probably more like 45.
Okay. Well, that's good, because when I asked you, I thought that was closer to 80. Okay, so this triggered a reorganization that is still coming into focus. Now, the reorganization was as the entity was going to be still part of UW Extension, UW colleges, because up until about 1 year and 4 days ago, steady the 50, no, 1 day and 6 years ago, this is going to proceed as part of UW Extension, UW colleges. And then on Wednesday, October 11th, I remember it well because I talked to everybody here about, whoa, this is a pretty big deal, especially that for me, Cooperative Extension was coming back to UW-Madison. And as Gerry mentioned, the president announced this plan. It include Wisconsin Public Broadcasting coming back here, which is big for us because Wisconsin Public Television is a partner with Wednesday night at the lab. Originally, this was all to happen by July 1st of 2018, and it will happen by July 1st. It's just it'll be 2019. So now we're at 2018. Remember, the whole issue of what is the Wisconsin idea is in flux, and where should we go from here? So the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation in the spring launched its Innovation in the Wisconsin Idea project. It's not too surprising that WRF is focusing on innovation, and innovation specifically of the type that leads to patents, which can be licensed, which can generate royalties. Because royalties are a lot like money and appropriations. Yep. And also entrepreneurship and starting up new companies and all that good stuff. So here are the contributors to the Innovation in Wisconsin Idea series. Eric started off with them, and if you can read that, you can see these are all folks who are involved in the innovation, invention, patenting, technology transfer, part of the deal, with a couple of people in the medical area that may or may not be so directly involved in patenting things. What don't you see here? Who isn't there? Who isn't represented? No, there's legislators there. Yeah. So it's not surprising, but it also calls for counterbalancing, which is why Gerry and I volunteered to give a talk to the group that meets here on Tuesdays, and they said, no way. Actually, they did, and then they asked extra people, so we ended up here on Wednesday night at the lab. So here's the first, or the second one. Mike Sussman was at the time that this came out, was my boss here at the Biotech Center. Tommy Thompson is one of the most successful politicians that Wisconsin has ever produced. And the key thing here is, all this stuff is really good, this word. A new Wisconsin idea, because the title of this is Renew the Wisconsin Idea. And there's a significant difference in my speechwriting ear between renewing the Wisconsin idea and a new Wisconsin idea. So here's some text from their essay. And again, what I saw here and what I think you're going to see here is how we engage with each other. And we, engaging with each other, is defined as our universities and industry and industries and university. Now, industry is pretty broad, but that is not the entire body politic of the state of Wisconsin. For WRF, this makes sense. But WRF is a $3 billion foundation with a lot of savvy in getting its messages out. And it's got 10 or 11, 12 people pumping out op-eds. So what I would like to be able to do is to say, we need to have a broader conversation. Technology transfer certainly is part of the Wisconsin idea. It is a beneficent influence. I hope it reaches every family of the state. But I think we need to be able to also say, here's some other great innovations that are coming out. We should have some seminars and sessions going on so our scientists and innovators can be heroes. I would like you to think about innovators because not all innovators are scientists. This is great because there's great innovators in other areas of the scholarly fields here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So here's an example, and all great things happen on a Wednesday. This is today. It happened across the street. So let's talk about some innovations, some entrepreneurs beyond those that can generate patents and licenses and royalties. There are many that you can go find at the Wisconsin Idea Seminar that Patrick Menzel started and that you can find online and at the YouTube website for Wednesday night at the lab. These are people that are testing ideas and prototyping systems, just like folks in engineering who are trying to build the next chip. But they're working in public health and environmental quality and all these other areas, family well-being, youth development, lifelong learning, to help Wisconsinites form a more perfect government, ensure domestic tranquility, and promote the general welfare. Does that sound like the U.S. Constitution? It's the Wisconsin Constitution. Sometimes it helps to have authorizing legislation. For example, and here's one that the speaker last night talked about, UW-Madison plans to increase family incomes. They're working with a former Google CEO's company, and this is pretty cool. How do we raise 10,000 Dane County families' incomes by 10% in 2 years? This thing is an astonishing project, drawing on the research base of the university, drawing on the connections with the community and the community-based knowledge, bringing to bear all the resources, or many of the resources of the university, far beyond only the kind of ag extension that we usually think of. Is cooperative extension part of this? No, not that I know of. But this is an example of the kinds of things that as cooperative extension comes back into UW-Madison, and they have a much better football team again now than we had when we were separate, that we can do. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about Numen Lumen Acumen. Numen Lumen is the motto of the university. Nobody knows what it really means. It's really bad Latin. I've never seen a good translation of it. But I know what acumen means. It means savvy. Well, I think I did. Anyway, I'll look it up. I want to repeat the historic interplay of authority, appropriations, and aspirations. These are dates that are touchstones for the history that Gerry rolled out for you. 1887, 1894, 1905, 1914, 1965, 73, 84, and 85, and now today. And in 5 years, because we're talking about the future and where should the Wisconsin idea go, particularly in relation to now the University of Wisconsin-Madison, for the first time since 1965, has eyes and ears and boots on the ground in all 72 counties. That's something that the university had right up till 1965, and then it lost. It became UW-Research, in my opinion. Now we're more coherent again. For example, in 1964, if you ask somebody in any county of Wisconsin, what has the University of Wisconsin done for you lately? You could say, oh, that's pretty far away, that's Madison. I go, okay. Been to your county extension office? Done anything with extension homemakers? Or your kids in 4-H? You go to the county fair. Do you listen to Wisconsin Public Radio? Do you watch Wisconsin Public Television? When you get sick, do you go to that inferior hospital in Minnesota, or you go down to Madison? Because what hospital do you go to? The University of Wisconsin Hospital. And in 1964, UW Hospital was still part of the UW. What's it part of now? Since 1995, it's been its own public authority, distinct from the university. What name does it go by? Okay. In 1905, I don't think the University of Wisconsin at Madison was the 6th largest research university by budget in the country. It is today. It was one of the most comprehensive research institutions in the country. That's something to keep in mind when you're thinking about, wow, what could extension do in the future a little bit better than maybe what they were doing when they were a separate organization. The big benefit for the University of Wisconsin-Madison, in my opinion, it's only my opinion, is once again, we have eyes and ears and boots on the ground all over Wisconsin. I'm trying to imagine what the impact is going to be in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years when there's a Crest W outside all the county offices. I'm hoping that's a good thing for everybody in Wisconsin. I believe pretty profoundly it's a very good thing for the University of Wisconsin-Madison. The big challenge will be to make sure it's a good thing for everybody in the counties. And finally, I want to make sure that we extend the definition of what innovation is. That it's not only those innovators that are inventing things that can be patented and licensed and generate royalties and create businesses, because there's more capital than financial capital. There's also social capital, there's community resilience, there's common weal, the public good, and as well as these other types of really good things and innovations in engineering and science and business. So to recap, because I gotta go pick my kids up, aren't you guys lucky? Since 1890, and probably before and still today, promoting science savvy is and will be fundamental to citizenship. That's what I build my career on. And that goes back in the literature at least to 1890. Academic freedom is a right, it is a duty, as Mr. Jefferson would have said, for the public scholars to share their expertise and to engage with the public. And every generation has the opportunity and the obligation to refine, redefine, refuel, and retool the Wisconsin idea. But our generation ought to at least match the Wisconsin ideal and aspiration. And that's all I have. Thank you very, very much.
We've been calling on our audience member here. We should let him introduce himself. So, at least one of our audience members. Carl.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm Carl Martin. I'm the Dean of Extension, Cooperative Extension.
And is it true you are the one employee of Cooperative Extension who's officially an employee of UW-Madison?
That's correct. As of July 1st.
I love it.
Well, the sidebar, when I came here in 1973, I got two separate checks. One from UW Extension and one from UW-Madison, because I had a 30% appointment in UW Extension. Or excuse me, yeah, 30% appointment roughly in UW Extension. And the two units were just in the midst of this system change and so forth and so on. So there's a lot of little things that change. The other thing I guess I will say is that for me, this is like, I mean, I got buckets of papers about the history. And it's just very hard to bring it all together. But you have the opportunity to be involved in influencing this university, your university. And I'm always shocked that people aren't willing to take the chance to write the letters, call the people, make connections. Because I lived in the place, so I know these people and I know a lot of them. The number that I know are declining, but I'm still not afraid to call somebody up and ask what's going on. Right now, there's a lot going on, and we don't do justice tonight and all that's kind of moving into place. But we hope that you will do, as Tom said at the end, live up to our chance to keep the ideals of the Wisconsin idea for the people of the state in all that they do to use the best that the university has to offer. And the best the university will have to offer will be better if people tell the university what they need and work together with them. We can cite a lot of examples where that's been done, in addition to the one I heard about last night, because I was here too. This was the Institute for Research on Poverty. It was talking about their 50 years worth of experience that they're trying to connect with the community for this raising income.
Questions? Comments? Can we leave yet? Yes?
Do you ever bring your show on the road?
No, Extension never ever leaves the campus.
No, I mean what you talked about tonight.
Oh, this one? You want to hear it again?
No.
Good. Good. My work here is done.
And I've learned a lot of it because
Yeah.
my students haven't explored
Yeah.
last year. But I'm asking you, I mean, in
Yes.
different extension offices, do you ever get people like us who would come to learn and listen about
Well, I would be
the
happy to.
Wisconsin idea and you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to go talk with anybody anywhere. That's part of the thing I like about being a specialist. My impression, I was not trained in extension. Like I got this job without having been a postdoc or done anything. My impression about extension is what I will say when I hear people talking about science communication. And science communication, when I hear people talk about science communication, it almost all is about this. And what I learned in cooperative extension is communication begins with this. And if you don't know how to go up and talk to people and listen and respond and hit the ball back and forth over the net, I don't know how effective you are at being an extension person. So I'd be happy to go
I'm
listen.
certainly willing to, as long as I have to do the overheads. Any more power.
You could take an extension course.
I could. Of course, I got the equipment. I just don't use it much anymore. I found an overhead projector in the flooded part of my basement, and I almost brought it tonight just to show Tom. So
He left the clay tablet at home, thank
one of
God.
the budget things that's really interesting to me, that it's been gone for so long that most people don't think about it. When I came here in the 70s, many of my friends didn't like this, but the truth is it was what what we needed to make a work of collaboration work, and that was we got together fairly often with people all over the state or people regionally. Now some people, I don't want to go to meetings because that's not my real work, but the fact is you met the people in the county offices. You knew who these people were that you were working with, beyond the ones that you worked with directly, maybe the program you were with. And there's not very much money to do that anymore. It's not looked on as productive outside the university. And the idea of building that situation, building that collaboration, I can tell you that Tom Zinnen has a saleable opportunity to tell other people how he built Wednesday night at the lab. Because it's one of the unique things going on in the use of television and other kinds of communications.
This is where you laugh.
You might laugh, but that was the history, part of the history I didn't talk about. The UW had a graduate program in extension administration. The UW had lots of courses in how you do this kind of work and what you learn from this work. That's all pretty much gone. It's probably not going to come back. But this kind of collaboration is the future of the world. We are not going to save this world one of us at a time. It's going to have to be working together with other people. My experience, my major job right now is I'm the lead singer and washboard player in a polka band. And I didn't start doing that until I retired. The world can be really fun if you get a bunch of people together and you can figure out how to stay together. A band is not a good place to start with doing that, but we managed to stay together. And those are the kinds of things, those participations in communities. Extension has always been a promoter, a place that people got together and could learn to get together. So.
Good. Other questions?
Well, I was raised in a small community, which was primarily agrarian, and I recall, and I'm 75 now, I recall a University of Wisconsin extension presence, and I'm talking about when I was 13, 14 years old. That presence does not exist in that community today. If I went to people ranging in age from 40 on down and asked them, is there a presence of a university extension in this community? They would look at me like, what are you talking about? Because the family program is basically gone. We have a large, the plant pathology program was huge presence in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. And farmers came consistently to that extension to seek information on how to provide for a better crop production. That's gone. It exists in a small little piece in the community, but for a presence of people coming to it and recognizing it for its expertise, that's gone. So what does that say?
It says there's not much money being put toward making that presence happen. I mean, you can't make that presence happen for nothing. It happened because in those times, and everybody who lived in those times will tell you how tough they were, but as a proportion of the total expenditures that were part of UW Extension, those things cost a lot of money. And you're not going to do it without people. But you're also not going to do it unless people, as Tom says, think that part of their job is building their network of people to work with. There's a colleague of ours at Cornell who's written a lot about what he calls educational organizing. And that means the work that you can do to build a group of people to work with. It takes time. People build alfalfa associations and a variety of other things. So we need more of both of those things going on. But,
And I would think of the years that we talked about, 1887, 1914, 1965. What was the percent of folks who lived on a farm then? What's the political clout of that part of our demography? And if you go up to Sturgeon Bay today, and I'm going up there next weekend to give a talk or a workshop for 4-H, I'm making slime at their request. And I was talking to the folks at the Peninsular Ag Experiment Station, research station there, when I was up in August, and you know they struggle to keep that open. There's still a lot of cherries and other kinds of orchards, but how many people loan those, and how many people work on them? And so, this is why we have to be careful about saying extension is agriculture extension, because that base is getting smaller. On the other hand, we're 5.8 million people. And if you think of ourselves as serving families and youth, that's 5.8 million people. We have to convince them that we're not just another social service agency, in my opinion. We have to convince them that there's something extraordinarily powerful about collaborating and working with and sharing their knowledge with us and us with them, because we are a research institution that's also an extension institution. Here's my magic wand. I don't have a magic wand, but I think that's the demographics, that the yin and yang of the demographics. It's pretty tough if you're looking at solely agricultural extension. Things can be more in our favor if we're looking at some of the other things,
My question would be, how did UW Extension react to the declining family farm, especially in the 1990s, and who is your new years now? So have you gotten different demographics and outreach of the 5.8 million people to expand, as you said, from agriculture?
One of the
Could you repeat the question, Tom?
Yeah, the question is, how did the UW Extension respond to the declining numbers of farmers, especially in the 1990s? So I'll talk personally because that's all I know. I have a job because in 1990 a law was passed and about bovine growth hormone. And that law did 5 things. One of them was set up the job that I currently have. And another one is it set up the Center for Integrated Ag Systems. And that is an early, I don't know if it's the earliest, but it's an early example of organic farming and farm systems and trying to get young farmers to come into agriculture. So I think that's one of the things that people are doing. Another thing is artisanal cheese and agricultural tourism. The hard part is you also have to be hard-headed about the numbers. How many people can do this for how much income and supporting how many farm families? So I think that's the major thing I can think of is we're the second largest, or first, I can't remember, number of organic farms in the country.
The other thing that we should say too is that starting in the 60s, UW Extension realized that rural Wisconsin was something beyond agriculture. And the Community Natural Resource and Economic Development Program began to grow, and some of the people in ag were not very happy that it began to grow because the money was always tight. But we have, a few years ago, I looked, because I went on leave at the University of Minnesota a few years. You know what that means if you're my age, that's like 15. University of Minnesota said they had 120 people doing community development. By the way, one of them might have been the current chancellor's husband, or father, because he worked for Minnesota Extension for many years in community development. And we asked, how many FTEs do you have? They had like 7 FTEs for the state. But everybody and his brother had a little tiny piece of community development in his job description. Wisconsin had more full-time community natural resource and economic development people in the counties than any other state for many years. I guess we're still there. And that was the recognition that when you drive through much of Wisconsin, what you count, if you want to look, is a lot of activity that's got nothing to do with farming directly. It's activity that's sometimes related to farming and sometimes related to what you do when half the people in your county are now over 65. Those numbers started going up a long time ago. And so that was one response. The agriculture community was not very happy with the response in the 90s and the 80s, but they pushed very hard. The Center for the Integrated Ag Systems came as a legislative appropriation because some people really made a lot of noise in the sustainable agriculture world. The university responded slowly and so forth and so on. So I think the reality of what rural Wisconsin is where you got to start. And the community development people have been really hard workers at what's really out there. What kind of businesses are there? What can we put in place? What kind of opportunities are there? And they're not Foxconn, the opportunities that you can put out there. They're little opportunities. There are several people in a plant and so forth and so on. So.
Other questions? Yeah.
I guess there's an observation. It seems like the university, because of budget cuts in particular, it's too expensive. Whether it's here or other smaller campuses, getting a college education is extremely expensive, and a lot of people no longer can afford to go to any of our campuses, and so they also can't take what they learn here and take it back to their communities. Right. So the question becomes, to me, that's part of an extension piece. How do you, people need to come to one of the Wisconsin universities and then take it back to the communities and figure out what they want to do with that education. I'm not sure how we go about
Well,
that.
I'll say one thing. One thing, our state has a much better retention rate of its population, a stability rate of people moving and moving out and relative to moving in. We still need more people to move in. We just do. The question of college affordability is a big one, and it's got lots of aspects. Extension has worked very hard with lots of communities on retention programs of both businesses and trying to help schools give experiences to students so they can think about coming back to work there. I don't have a big problem. I think Tom's point would be, if you want to deal with that, you got to go start listening to people, and you can't necessarily pontificate about, I'm going to fix it with this silver bullet. I think that's one of the parts of the history of some things that have really worked well, was when you could build that coalition of local people who wanted to get in and do the work they needed to do, complemented by the work information and the knowledge they could get from the university. And one of the most successful community development programs was one where you sent the people out in the community to collect the data they needed to collect in the community. And that's really powerful. That's part of what's going on with this program to raise incomes in Dade County, is talking to people in the real world.
So the chancellor announced earlier this year or late last year that there would be a program, Chancellor Blank. Any student that gets in here, that gets admitted, and whose family income is median or less, the university will make sure that either through a combination of gifts, grants, scholarships, whatever, that their tuition and fees will be covered. The chancellor is very clear That's not the same thing as having a full ride. But as far as college affordability, that's a pretty interesting thing. Speaking to your issue of how do we get more people in the communities, in a perfect world where you have a bell curve and here's the median, you would expect half of our students to be from the lower half and the other half to be from the upper half. But only about a third of our students at UW-Madison are from the lower half. So does that tell you about accessibility? So I think that's one of the opportunities, challenges, whatever. Catherine Lyle, when she was president of the system, and Kevin Riley, when he was chancellor of UW Extension, wrote an op-ed, must have been 15 years ago, and it started off with, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we had a statewide youth development system that was tied into the whole UW system? And wouldn't it be great if there were people in all 72 counties that were tied into that? Oh, and by the way, we already have that. It's called 4-H and Youth Development. I don't know where 4-H and Youth Development, or what the new name that goes by, I'll just use the old names, where that will go, but I think if there's enough people that are expressing your kind of concern about college accessibility, college affordability, aspirations, where do we want to go when we're done with high school, that's something that we can do. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to, because a big part of my job is premised on the idea that hospitality is reciprocal. If we as Extension people want to be welcomed into communities all over Wisconsin, we in turn have to be able to welcome people to our place. So right through that door are the 2 outreach labs that I've been working with since 23 years and 1 day ago, because we moved in this building on October 16th of 1995. So hospitality.
We'll have to go out for a beer because of his anniversary set.
We have to go out to the beer because they're dying of dehydration. Other questions? Carl?
I guess just a couple things to point out. Cooperative Extension is part of the land grant institution in all 49 states, except Wisconsin. So we're actually coming more in line with every other state in the country. So Cooperative Extension is different in every state, but there are some things that are common. And I'm very optimistic about the move to Madison. I think it actually will really increase the breadth of programming that we can do. Couple other things. As far as our size, Gerry, you brought that up. We're about a third from the top when you start looking at Madison entities. Obviously, Medicine and Public Health, Letters in Science, CALS, but we're not too far down from that group. I think one thing to remember, and this is only true in 8 other states, that Cooperative Extension is going to be its own division. It's not going to go back to be part of the College of Ag and Life Sciences. That's really important because of the diversity of programming we do. So you talked a little bit about the evolution. Community economic development, that was really in the 80s. Natural resources is a big area we work in. We have about 160 people that work on natural resource issues. That was really evolving in the 90s. Now we're really looking at health, and health being a big issue. We have an opioid task force. We're looking at investing in health. And a lot of this, and you brought this up, it's really around what's the pull? What do our counties and tribal partners need? And that's what we're hearing from them. So I'm actually very optimistic about the future. I would point out that we do work with tribes also. You talked a lot about the counties, but we actually have embedded extension agents with 5 tribes around.
What are those tribes, and how's that different from Menominee Reservation / county?
We work with Lac de Flambeau, so we have educators in Lac de Flambeau, have for a long time. Lacuta Ray, we have and they co-fund those positions, much like the counties do. Potawatomi, we also have an educator with Potawatomi.
There are 2 land grant tribal colleges in
Correct.
Wisconsin. From 1994, I think, was when the
Yep.
act came.
Yep.
So those, when you research for land grants in Wisconsin, boom, they pop up. I didn't know there were 2. I knew one at Menominee, but I didn't know the other.
Yes, Lacuta Ray is the other one.
Yeah.
And I'll echo that. I hope you heard that from me also. We are not coming back to the College of agriculture and life sciences, which is where we were in 1960, we being Cooperative Extension. We are coming back to UW-Madison, and that's why I'm so happy to make that point, that it's a pretty remarkable thing for a state of 5.8 million people to have a UW system, and I went to UW Platteville and I worked for UW Extension when it still existed, and to have this high caliber of a research institution. And I'm hoping that's the future of cooperative extension.
The pieces of UW-Madison that if you sat down in a room and started writing, who could you collaborate with from that division?
Yep.
Nelson Institute, already a lot of collaboration on environmental issues with the Nelson Institute. The Center for Research on Poverty that we were talking about last night. There's a whole bunch of those. And the thing I advise is everybody needs to go talk to the people in them. You know, don't be afraid to walk in and say, we're here and we want to talk. I think most people in Extension do that already if they're already connected in Madison in some way. But it's just a challenge, big pieces of big institutions.
And again, the other aspect is UW-Madison is going to benefit so much, at least in my opinion. Maybe I'm hoping that it will, because of the amazing resources that are out in the 72 counties, that it's a reciprocal engagement, that we are a stronger institution at UW-Madison because of the insights and talents that are contributed by the folks that we work with all over the state. And it's been, UW-Madison was different compared to a lot of our other land grant research universities because of the separation in 1965. Nobody else did that. Now that means, wow, we did a really cool thing and nobody else could follow us, or we did kind of a strange thing and everybody else went. And I don't know how that's going to shake out, but I'm very hopeful that this university will be strengthened by the connections that cooperative extension and the other parts of extension, public television, public radio, bring to UW-Madison. All right, one more, because you always ask the last question.
I wait till the last time. It was sort of answered before by, observation.
Oh, then we're done.
Come on.
All right, get it out.
Real quick here. It seemed, okay, we asked, my wife and I, some of our children who went to the Wisconsin public school system, do you know what the Wisconsin idea is? Mm-hmm. And do you know what they told us? Never heard of it.
Yes.
Never heard of it. Now, they went through not only elementary, but elementary, high school, college. Never heard of the Wisconsin idea. Every one of them went to a school in Wisconsin, elementary, and some, through this whole technical, everything. Not one of them heard of it.
And if they had, and if Gwen Drury were here, she would say they're not hearing about the comprehensive Wisconsin idea from 1912. As I mentioned in my missive, I never heard about it till I was a junior at UW Platteville. I grew up in Illinois. I can tell you one thing, there is an Illinois idea, and that is, I think I'll vote twice. What? Come on.
Being from Chicago.
Yeah, see?
Absolutely. Yep.
And so, yeah, that's a ding, but it's like, what I want to respond to is the idea that the idea doesn't matter to the people that work here. It does. It's in the literature, the professional literature, and you can walk around here. Many, many people here are driven and elevated because of the Wisconsin idea. It may just be a mantra, it may just be a brand, but it's different than most other universities have, and if there's another university that has something like this, let me know. And then I think we ought to let you go before you all. Thank you very much for coming.